Okay, I'll call the meeting of the combined meeting between the school board and the Board of Supervisors together on this December the 2nd, 2014, a regular scheduled meeting. Ellen, would you call the roll, please, for the Board of Supervisors?
Mr. Zaremba?
Here.
Mrs. Knoll?
Here.
Mr. Wiggins?
Here.
Mr. Riczak?
Here.
Mr. Shepherd?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Are you going to, do you do a roll call?
Mr. Wiggins, I'm going to call to order the school board of York County on this day of December the 2nd, 2014, in our joint meeting, special meeting with the Board of Supervisors. And we have someone taking minutes, so we've been called to order. And we appreciate the fact that we're able to meet together and to spend some time starting some dialogue as we move into FY16 and discussions on our budgets. So turn back to you.
We appreciate the same meeting with you guys too, Mark. And by the way, this is Mark Medford, and Mark is the chairman of the school board.
And one thing too, Mr. Mentor could not be here this evening. He is under the weather, and he didn't want to come spread his germs among family here, so we told him to stay home. So anyway, we wish him a speedy recovery, and wanted to make sure we mentioned that.
Well, we're always really pleased to have the Boy Scouts show up at our meetings, and it's almost every meeting now we're able to recognize some of the Boy Scouts, and I guess they get a badge for learning about local government, and that's why you see them. They've got, some of them have little pads that they're going to write stuff down on. And I told them one of these days they're going to be sitting up here where we are.
That's right. And
they need to learn what it's all about. And the first group I'd like to recognize is Boy Scout Troop number 414, and we have Kyle Chang and Terry Chang. Kyle's mother. Would you stand, please, and just remain standing until the other troop stands. The other troop is Troop 200, and we have Logan Atkins. Logan, would you stand up? And Derek Atkins. And I'm told they look like twins, but they're not. Is that right?
They're twins.
Okay, and then we have Michael Menepes, and we have Wally Atkins, the father. And we're really proud of you too, because to take an interest in the Boy Scouts like you do, and bring them to these meetings, and it means a lot to us. So let's give them a hand for showing up. Okay, our first order of business is our work session with our school board.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shander and I appreciate the opportunity to present a briefing on a few topics to you, and then we will appreciate the opportunity to listen to your discussion. So we're going to lead it off first with Mr. Cross, Tim Cross, who's the principal planner for the county. And as many of you know, each year Tim works with the school division staff to do a projection of the following year anticipated enrollment. And he's done that recently. And I would say that he's been very accurate over the years. He's got a good crystal ball. But this year he took it a step further. And knowing that Yorktown Elementary and Magruder Elementary have been topics of discussion here recently in terms of capacity issues, he's looked at the status of existing development that's underway, development that's planned, and development that's somewhere out in the future, and tried to get a good handle on what's going to occur, how many units are going to be built over the next 10 or so years, and what the timing of that might be, hopefully in an effort to give both boards a baseline of information that can be used in the budget deliberations that are upcoming here very shortly. So With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and allow him to present some information. You have a detailed memo in front of you tonight, as well as the slides that he's going to present. If you really want to delve into it, the memo has lots and lots of statistics and information. He's going to provide a synopsis of that information in the slides.
Chair, can I just ask a quick question? So, sort of housekeeping question, because this always becomes an issue. Should we ask questions as the presentation moves along, or wait until the end of the presentation, or at least certain thresholds of the presentation?
What's best for you, for the school board? Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, we can wait for the presentation, or, or we could do it either way. We sometimes our questions will be answered in the presentation if we wait till the very end.
So you prefer for us to wait till the end? All right.
Okay. Okay, Tim.
All right, thank you. Good evening, all. Just wanted to start off showing a little bit about the enrollment trend over the past 10 years. These are the September average daily membership figures published by the school division. As you can see, enrollment, ADM, has been up and down over the last 10 years, mostly down since 2008, when everything was down. We had the recession, retail sales were down, new home sales were down, employment was down, and you saw 4 consecutive years of declining school enrollment. There was a big increase this past year from 2013 to 2014, but almost all of it took place during the 2013-14 school year, largely because of the repopulation of Bethel Manor, or the landings at Langley, as those housing units completed their renovation and were filled up. The increase from last May to last September was actually very minimal. So we're basically, right now, we are where we were about 10 years ago. We had 12,562 in 2004. We got 12,530 in 2014. And one thing to point out is these last, from about 2008 on, they started including alternate placements in the ADM figures. So if you want to take about 50, or add about 50 students to those other years from 2004 to 2008, you'd get more of an apples-to-apples kind of picture. For next September, we're projecting 12,670, another increase. Part of the reason for that increase is attributable to the next phase of the Marine Corps Security Force Regiment consolidation at Naval Weapons Station Yorktown, which is scheduled to arrive in August of 2015, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail in a minute. This is new home construction over that same period. You can see although we've had no net increase in enrollment over the last 10 years, this is despite the construction of 2,700 housing units. Again, as you can see, things started to taper off toward the end there with the recession. One factor that we think contributed to this year's enrollment increase is an increase in sales of existing homes, and the likelihood that at least some of these sales involved older empty nester households being replaced by younger families with school-aged children. As this chart shows, residential property transfers have been on the rise since 2010, while new construction, as you saw in the previous slide, has been relatively flat. One thing I need to point out is that not all of these transfers involve changes in ownership necessarily. Property transfers can be sales, but they can also be things like name changes as a result of marriage, divorce, or placement of a home in a living trust, which seems to be more common these days. Focusing on the Yorktown and Magruder attendance zones, in the past 10 years, these two zones have attracted more than their share of new housing. Overall, 1,010 housing units built in the last 10 years, most of them before the housing market collapsed in 2008, as you might imagine. In the early years, 2004, 5, 6, 7, you see a lot of activity there in Magruder. We had a number of big projects, housing projects come online, Creekside Landing, Vineyard Heights, Gates Woods, and Highgrove. Since then, not too much activity in the Magruder zone. All those projects I just named are built out. In the Yorktown, I'm still on that slide. In the Yorktown zone, most of the activity in recent years has been the Riverwalk Towns development. They're off of Route 238, which is now also built out. Okay. And these schools have also attracted more than their share of students. In the last 10 years, the combined ADM at these two schools has increased from 1,031 to 1,256, a difference of 225 students. As we try to project the impact of future housing on school enrollment in these two zones, we have to look at the number of approved units. We also have to look at the type of units. We have to look at how far along they are in the development process. So we have grouped these housing developments, approved housing developments, into three categories. First category you could think of as units that will come online in the short term, and we call it active projects. Projects that have completed development review, have approved development plans, and are under construction. We have a few of those, not very many. Second category is what we call pending projects. These are plans that are somewhere in the development review process but do not yet have plat recordation or final site plan approval. And then you think of those as medium term projects, units that will come online in the medium term. Then in the long term, we have what we call planned projects. These are projects that have been approved through a rezoning process, but so far no subdivision plans or site plans have been submitted yet. And that's where a large bulk of the future housing is located. Okay, these are the two zones that we're talking about, and the housing projects that are somewhere in the pipeline are shown here. Purple for active projects, blue the pending category, and then red the planned projects. And for orientation purposes, there's a naval weapons station, and that's significant for reasons that I'll go into. You can see the proximity of all these housing projects to the naval weapons station. Overall, we've got 12 housing projects that are somewhere in the development pipeline in these two attendance zones. 156 in the active category, 427 in the pending category, and 872 in the planned category. You can see those projects in the out years. The Marquee, 650 units, approved through rezoning November of 2013. And the Whitaker's Mill project in that same general area, 222 units, approved just last month. Most of these other projects have been around for a while. And this is how the type of units breaks down. As you can see, the majority of units are not single-family detached. This is significant because single-family detached homes, as you might expect, tend to generate more students per unit than other types of housing. Rental apartments, townhouses. Single-family attached means townhouses or duplexes, quadruplexes. And condos generate hardly any school students at all. When you add it all up, it comes to 1,599 future units. This is as of November 1st. And from these almost 1,600 units, we're projecting 312 future students. Now, these student multipliers are based on real data. Planning Division, we have a good working relationship with the school division's transportation office. Very helpful in providing us student numbers on request for different streets, different developments. And then we have the unit numbers. It makes it easy to calculate any development in the county, what the average number of students per housing unit is. And then we use these to project forward. Okay. And future housing units by attendance zone, a very similar chart. And as you can see, almost all the activity, housing activity and school students will be in the Yorktown zone, where all the projects are that are either currently underway or soon to be underway, while the Magruder impacts are generally in the out years. As you can see, that 872 there, the green bar on that chart. 300, sorry, I was on the wrong page, 164 on that chart. 312 students total, a little bit more at Magruder than at Yorktown.
Tim, excuse me.
Yes.
Do you have a time, future time when you think that these, that we'll have to have more schools? Do you have you done a study on this to see if
Well,
these houses were gonna be built and
based
people moving in?
based on our projections, we are estimating or projecting about 200 students in these two zones over the next 5 years. For the rest of the build-out, it would probably be another 5 to 10 years for all those housing units to get absorbed, unless something were to happen to dramatically improve the housing market. One thing, just looking back at, or I don't want to go back to that slide, but if you remember the slide showing the housing units over the past 10 years in these two zones, it was roughly 100 per year, and over the last 5 years, it was about 57 per year. 1,600 units is an awful lot of units to absorb, even at 100 a year, which might be optimistic from the developer's standpoint. So we're looking at probably 10 to 15 years for all this construction to actually take place. One thing.
Which locality, excuse me, which locality do you think that we would need more space in the beginning?
Well, Yorktown, the Yorktown attendance zone is where almost all of the new housing is going to be in these two zones in the next several years. There are just there's one active project in the Magruder zone. That's a 23-unit subdivision, Washington Ridge, over by Carver Gardens. I think they've got 3 units occupied right now, so 20 more units. And other than that, there are no active projects in the Magruder zone, and there is nothing in that pending project category. You see the 0 there on the chart. There are no projects in the pipeline that are going to come along soon. The only other 2 projects, approved projects in Magruder, are the Marquee and Whitaker's Mill, which, as you know, was approved just a month ago through rezoning. The Marquee does not even have a site plan in yet for any of the apartments or townhouses. It doesn't have a subdivision plan in yet for the single-family detached portion. So, I mean, you think about a project of that magnitude, 650 units, similar to Coventry. Coventry, I think, was approved in either 86 or 87, and construction didn't begin until the early mid-90s. And it didn't really finish until a couple of years ago with the apartments there off Owen Davis Boulevard. 650 units is an awful lot of units. And again, right now, they're not even at the first step in the development process. Well, I'll take that back. They did submit a pre-application, they did go through a pre-application meeting, but to date, they haven't submitted any detailed engineering plans.
Sure, I got a comment to make, okay. Mr. Cross, a couple days ago in the Daily Press, front page, upper part of that page, major development in Lower York County. One of the developers was Donald Davis. I'm sure you read the article.
Commonwealth Green is the project
Yeah,
you're talking about.
And the comments in that article said that they expected to have that built out in 3 years.
I didn't approve it.
So notice it's not at all indicated on your charts, or is it?
Well, it's not in the Magruder or Yorktown zone, so
But
we didn't look at it.
There's going to be an effect on the student population for sure when those units are built, I suspect. So I think on behalf of the board, we'd want to make sure that we don't overlook whether the student population is going to just explode in Upper County, or what's the significance of what's happening down in the rest of the county.
Well, that wasn't part of our analysis, but you're correct. That is going to cause a problem at Grafton
Right.
Bethel Elementary School. And that was something that we looked at back when it went through the rezoning process back in 2012, I think it was. 3 years. In your memo, you'll see a table where we compare some of the developers' predictions on how fast these projects would build out, compare them with reality, and it's not even close. it's
yeah,
something
I
like
understand
87
that too,
to
yeah.
400, where we
Well,
would
you
be at
can-
this point.
You can ask him, sure.
I didn't know if you were finished. I had a question, but I would wait until you finished.
I'm just rambling, go ahead.
Early on, you defined pending and planned, and then you gave the example of Coventry. Is it possible? I guess the question I was asking, the general time frame between pending to planned, and Coventry was an example of a long time period. The shortest time you could see something turn around, and I think because it would be up to the developer who may decide, I'm now ready to go in and move, and that developer could move quickly.
Going from pending to planned could take place relatively quickly, because it's not a huge leap from, depending on how detailed your plans are at the rezoning stage, and converting those into detailed engineering plans. See, the first step of the process is what we call a preliminary plan. Doesn't always apply, and the preliminary plan is not as detailed as your development plan. So going from a rezoning plan to a preliminary plan, that could be done relatively quickly. Going from a preliminary plan, getting approval, to a development plan, which is much more detailed, that's going to take a little longer. Development plan, then you've got to, we're talking about it for a subdivision, you go from a development plan to submitting a subdivision plat, getting it recorded. We looked at we looked at the active projects just to get a feel for the time frame that's involved there. And for the 5 active projects in these 2 zones, it ranged from about 6 months for Nelson's Grant to 5 years for Sterling Springs. The average was 2 years, about 24 months between development plan approval and actual construction of units, and units being occupied. So we're in our analysis, we're using 2 years as sort of a working number in trying to project, how far out these projects will come online. One of the big projects in the pending category is Rose Hill, in the Lackey area, 242 units. That plan first came in, I believe it was 2007. And here we are at 2014. They do have a approved development plan, which I think was approved back in February. But I wouldn't expect that project to actually come online with actual units for another 2 years after that, because you've got, again, plat approval, plat recordation, you got site work, infrastructure to install, roads to build. So the development process from review to construction is a very long process. So people see these projects getting approved and start to worry, but projects like the Marquee and Whitaker's Mill, I don't see those coming online anytime soon.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Tom?
Tim, just an example of what you're talking about, reference to Marquee. We basically approved zoning for about 650 units up there, but that was based on a very preliminary review of the property. My understanding is that when you get down to doing the wetlands review and you get down to that detail, it could be a significantly less number. I heard as low as 480.
The pre-application plan that they submitted did show fewer units. So yeah, that 650 is probably is optimistic
That's
on their
high
part.
end, right.
That's the maximum that it's going to be. It's probably going to come in less than that. You're right. You get into more detail, units typically come down. I think Rose Hill started in the high 200s. It was around 270, 280, something like that, and now they're down to 242. And don't know. I assume they're going to stop at 242 now they've got an approved development plan, but that's typically the case.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Showing up.
Well,
I have to ask you all to look at your paper copy.
slide 16
This one?
This one here.
Oh, this one?
is a table showing the
Blue ones?
the data for the Marine Corps Security Force Regiment Consolidation and Naval Weapons Station, Yorktown. Because we're assuming that what's going to drive housing demand in these two attendance zones is largely that consolidation. What's in the table is the latest information that we have from the Navy on the consolidation. It's the best information available, but I would point out it is tentative and subject to change. These things change frequently, but currently the schedule calls for the next phase of those personnel to arrive at the base August 2015, just in time for the next school year. We're talking about 172 dependents under age 21, and estimated households 125. Phase 2 is supposed to arrive July 2017, 2 years after. And that's a smaller number of families, smaller number of likely students. And by that point, you'll probably have some of these projects that have moved from pending to active. So the housing is going to be available for those Marine families to move into. And then the Phase 3, tentatively scheduled for the end of 2018, brings another 63 dependents under age 21, about 92 households. I do want to point out not all of these families are going to wind up in York County, but we are assuming that a lot of them will. These families do tend to be larger than the average family in York County, so to account for these larger families, I mentioned that 312 figure as our projection. We've added 35 students to account for that, so the total projection generated of students generated by new construction, home construction that's on the books, comes to 347. And after 2018, the consolidation will be over, and so that spike in housing activity, net migration, is probably going to come to an end unless something else happens that creates another stimulus.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Jim, all these numbers came from the Navy,
Yes, sir.
so I'm assuming that they're moving all their families here first, these single soldiers afterwards. Just we have the fewer number of military personnel, yet the largest number of dependents in the first year. After that, military personnel go up, dependents go down.
Yeah, the military personnel includes families and bachelors in enlisted quarters, BEQ, who will live in barracks on the base.
So what it looks like is all the families are coming here first.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the plan, or at least in my discussions with our liaison at the weapons station, I haven't gotten that indication, but that could be the case. I don't know.
How many students did you say that the Marine Corps paid in all this kind of generation?
Well, as of now, they're looking at 309 dependents. And then we apply some factors. We have to make some assumptions. How many of those are going to be in York County? How many of them will be school age? And that's where we came up with the numbers that we came up with. And
So the 309 is what you're...
no, 309 is the total dependents that are going to be coming with those families.
So what's your
under age
number
21.
for York County?
Uh,
I thought you just said that a second ago, maybe.
347.
The additive
Yeah.
to account for the military families was 35, I think.
No, that was in addition.
In addition to account for the larger families. But we're assuming that, again, not all of these military dependents and military families will live in York County. They're going to be absorbed into the housing market that's already available in York County. So we really don't have a way to predict exactly how many of these military families will in fact live in York County.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood, and I thought you said the number.
Excuse me, you said 155 students? Is that what you were projecting from the military housing?
No, 155 is what we
That's the 5-year
That's
growth.
new housing.
So this is really soft, is what you're saying. The number is good. Any guess would be pretty wild, but it's just, it won't be any more than 309, you think?
Shouldn't be more than 309. It should be less than 309.
All right, but I mean, for planning purposes, there's no really, there's no number to give us.
Right, we don't know how many of those
Okay.
309 will actually be living in York County.
Okay.
Correct.
Tim,
Yes.
when Fort Monroe shut down, and they moved all those people to Fort Eustis, within Fort Eustis, there was one heck of a building boom of housing and business buildings, command headquarters and so on and so forth. Do we know whether or not there's going to be any housing built at the Naval Weapons Station to house some of these people coming in? I know the young, the unmarried folks live in the barracks out there, but what about, what's our knowledge on
There will
housing
be,
for families?
there will be no new family housing built on base. In the words of the Weapons Station liaison, the Navy's getting out of the housing business, family housing business. They're relying on the private market, and that's why we're figuring it's going to drive up a lot of housing activity in these developments.
I just have a question to back up a little bit. I know you've always been very accurate on your projections for our student counts each year, and we appreciate that, working with our staff, because it really helps us project and what we budget for. This year, we came in higher than our budgeted number of students. I'm looking at Vic, Dr. Shandor. I know we're projected, we had a projection, but we're over right now, how many?
It's about right now about 100, between 100 and 125.
Okay, so we have, 125 extra students that that showed up to York County on our doorsteps first day of school, or first couple of weeks of school, that we're having to make accommodations for now. Is this a trend that we're going to start? I mean, it's kind of crystal ball again, and I know you're really good at this, but do we see something beginning to happen where our projections, or your projections, could start, we could see this, I mean, more families moving back into York County, or some examples you gave us where we start seeing just growth in that area beyond our projections?
2013-14 school year was an anomaly. We had, usually ADM is pretty flat throughout the year. It kind of, goes up and down. Usually it kind of trails downward. This past year, Mark, you want to slide down? There's a slide near the end there. You want to fast forward?
go too
Keep
far?
going, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
It's kind of cluttered, but
We did reduce
no,
that.
this was something that we just prepared in case the question came up. If you look at the dashed line, and that's ADM by month over the past school year. And you can see it climbed throughout the year, and it climbed pretty steeply, which
What
didn't
line
happen.
you looking at?
The dashed line, the black dashed line. Compare that to any of the other lines, or the red line, which shows the average over that, I think it's a 10-year period. And you can see it's highly unusual. And what happened, a lot of that was due to something that we knew was going to happen, which was, as I mentioned, the completion of the housing reconstruction project at Bethel Manor, the landings at Langley, and the movement of those of families into those housing units. We and the school division met with representatives from the Air Force Base, and they gave us a timeline. The reality didn't follow that timeline exactly, but what happened was in October there was an increase, which is unusual. In November there was another increase, which is unusual. And what we said in our projection memo, we projected, I think, 12,420 or something like that. But we did take note of this unusual trend and said that if it were to continue, we'd probably be looking at 12,500 students as of September 2014. Not too far off there, we came in at 12,530. In fact, if you look at the very end there, we were almost at 12,500 the end of last year. So that's why I said if you look at May of 2014, the end of the last school year and the beginning of this school year, there's almost no increase at all. You went from 12,500 to 12,530. I think that was an unusual circumstance. I don't foresee that as becoming a general trend. One thing that plays into that sum, the more rental housing that you see, typically rental housing has more of a delayed impact because units get built well before they get occupied. And we saw some of that last year with those apartments at Coventry, where students started coming in at Coventry Elementary School well after the last units were built. We could see that again at Yorktown Arch, which is a rental community, and we tried to account for that in our projection for next year. But I don't see it as a general trend that we're likely to see year after year. Yes.
With regards to Langley, just to change gears a little bit, it's always seemed a little bit like a moving target to me. A lot of moving pieces. Is there any posturing we need to kind of be aware of that we might need to do within the next 3 to 4 years in terms of, maybe less transfers, the privatization of the housing, different things that are happening out there? Do you have any information on that might give us a little insight as to what we can expect?
Not really. I mean, the project is completed, so we're hoping that that situation is stabilized.
What about the number of transfers, people coming into the area, people leaving the area? I know they were down for a while. Are we getting as many in as we're losing at this point?
That I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
I think one thing you may be talking about, Dr. George, I'm a military family, so I know the military it seems to be looking at extending tours at a longer
less
period of
movement.
time, so they don't have the expense of moving families every 3 years. Do you know any update on that?
No, I mean, we're for our projection purposes, we're assuming that the project's going to be basically 100% occupied.
Well, keep in mind
Year to year.
that Langley is going through a drawdown now, okay, 700 and some positions out of the headquarters, and they're looking at possibly a consolidation of another command down there, but that's still, who knows? But overall, it's there's actually a draw in the total scope of the force at Langley is shrinking.
And I believe that those units are no longer limited to Langley personnel.
I was just going to say. the
My
units
recollection
are
is they're
open
opened
to
up to all military.
So that they want to keep them filled rather
Right,
than.
exactly. So yeah,
It's
that's
not
what our
dependent upon
assumption
one
is, that
activity.
they're going to be occupied.
Tim, I've got an observation, okay? Assuming that these graphs are correct, if you look at, whoops, sorry.
I took it away, sorry.
If you look at it for a while, what you got to conclude is, as recently as 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, our infrastructure, our school infrastructure, was housing or accommodating anywhere 12,800 plus students. All right? I don't ever remember the numbers that high, but nevertheless, and today we're talking about somewhere between, well, going back a few years with that dash line, we never get up to, we get up to about 12,500. One of the conclusions that you get from that, if you're not very smart like me, is we've got more school space than we need. And I know that's not one of the conclusions that would come out of tonight, okay? But, correct me, tell me how I'm wrong with that kind of analysis using those graphs.
Well, I mean, there have been additions to schools over the years, for one thing. They do utilize portable classrooms, trailers,
Yeah.
to accommodate students when they get surprise increases. And so, they have ways of.
We've also increased classrooms. as
That's what I said.
well.
I
Not
said
just
there have been
travel.
some additions to
Yeah.
existing schools over the past several years. I mean, it's been pretty much an ongoing thing where there's, at some school, there's an addition underway. So we've added a lot of capacity in the past few years.
Mr. Zaremba, in some cases, as we looked at putting things on the CIP for additions to our buildings, were to remove the portables that were falling apart or just, their life had ended at that point and needed to be removed. So we tried to get rid of the portables as quickly as we could within the confounds of a capital improvement project to add 6 classrooms. Like Seaford Elementary, we're ribbon cutting the classroom addition, and we removed the portables that were out behind the school that we're doing Thursday morning. And now that the students are in the building now, they're not outside the building. And so Magruder still has a portable behind the building.
A portable.
A portable.
One class.
But all the classrooms are full.
It's just an observation I was making. I'm saying,
And those trailers are not
Explain
counted
that
in
to
the
me.
capacity figures for the schools.
Yeah.
They only count permanent capacity.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay.
Was there a rezoning, particularly at that time, perhaps? I'm assuming this was way back.
We did some shuffling of, I believe it was Naval Weapons Station. I believe we did some, to move some families, was it out of Yorktown Elementary or to Yorktown Elementary from
equal out.
Magruder? Because we had to balance the load between Magruder and Yorktown.
May have been helpful at that time.
Conclusions. Well, as I said, we're expecting almost 1,600, there are almost 1,600 approved future housing units somewhere in the pipeline in the Magruder and Yorktown attendance zones. Most of this housing will not be single-family detached. There'll be other types of housing that generate fewer students per unit on an average basis. Most of the new housing construction and the new students in the near term will be in the Yorktown attendance zone. The Marine Corps Security Force Regiment consolidation at Naval Weapons Station will stimulate housing activity for the next 4 years. Those families tend to be larger than the average York County family. So new housing only, is projected to add a total of 155 students at these 2 schools in the next 5 years. And then when you add, next,
Oops, sorry.
sorry. Other factors, there are other factors that lead to school enrollments, not just new housing, resident births and sales of existing homes, which I spoke about earlier, are projected to add another 30 to 50 students in the next 5 years based on recent trends. And so that brings the total, as I said, that we're expecting in the next 5 years at these 2 schools to about 200. And for the long term, as far as everything, all the housing that's on the books, we're projecting a total of almost 350 students at Magruder and Yorktown, when you factor all 12 of those housing developments into, take them all into account.
How do you factor outward migration? I mean, is that all tied into this? How many people move out of the area, military gets transferred?
Well, all we can do, since we don't have any data, is to look at trends. And what we do is we look at, what grades 1 through 12.
Okay.
We look at, when we're projecting for next year, we take the number of students at each grade level in the current year, advance it forward. And then we have to apply a growth factor in grades 1 through 12. And that's typically something that we base on recent trends, housing activity, all of these things. We also have to make a guess what we call, or what I call, migrant kindergartners, which are kindergartners who weren't actually born in York County, because we start with resident births 5 years ago.
Yes.
And so that's typically around 580, 590. It has been for the past 5 years or so. And then on top of that, you've got about 250 or so kindergartners in addition to that. So we consider them, kindergarten students who moved to the county sometime within the past 5 years. That number has been fairly stable for most of the past 5 years. It kind of dropped off, I think, this past year. But we put all of those together, and the assumption is that we look at net migration. So in-migration, out-migration are factored into those 1 through 12 growth factors. And from there, we add the numbers up and come up with next year's projection.
Tell me, how do we handle homeschoolers? I mean, a lot of times they're homeschooled through elementary school, but they come to the high school. How is that factored in when they already live in York County?
Well, that phenomenon should be factored into the grade-to-grade growth figures, going from 8 to 9. And it is, in fact. I mean, you see a big jump at certain grade levels, 8 to 9. Then 9, 10, 11, 12, it tends to drop off throughout the high school years. So, these are trends that we look at over a 12-year period. We look at the 12-year average. We look at the near-term 6-year average. And we take a guess. We basically make a guess, what's likely to be based on trends, housing, all of these things.
Very complicated.
Sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong.
You're more right than wrong.
I was going to say your guesses are pretty accurate.
I think you've done very,
We've
very
had
well.
some success.
Tim, I have a question reference. I don't know, somebody sent me an email that had attachment to it that went to the numbers reference to the school increase across the state and all the jurisdictions. And it showed that every one of them, except for maybe up around Northern Virginia, in Alexandria, in that area, in Fairfax, were decreasing. And that was 2013 figures. So based on what we're projecting here, either York County is starting a trend completely separate from the rest of the state, or something's happening. And I'm wondering how this is, what is so different here? Are you focused principally on the new housing development, or in your overall analysis?
Well, number one, York County has typically exceeded other localities in terms of enrollment growth. Number two, we're looking at the influx of Marine Corps families. As far as we saw, without the anomalies at Bethel Manor, we might have had a decrease in enrollment last year. We only had a very small increase from 2012 to 2013. It was only about 30 students, and I think, and at the repopulation of Bethel Manor was going on at that time, so we definitely would have seen a decrease there. So we did have 4 consecutive years of decrease, probably would have had 5. Again, the main reason we expect things to turn around, resales are up, as you saw in that slide, and we do think that empty nester syndrome plays into it, because some of that increase that occurred this past year cannot be attributed to the Bethel Manor situation. So as the population continues to age, I think the empty nester syndrome is going to continue. Home sales, we only have partial data for 2014, but they're above where they were a couple years ago. They'll probably be slightly above where it was last year by the end of the year. So that'll probably add to enrollment. And I mentioned the Yorktown Arch project, where you've got a lot of units but very few students. But as I said, there's a delay from construction of rental units to occupancy, and so we're thinking that next year that'll factor into not employment but enrollment increase. Again, after the Marine Corps consolidation, it could flatline again.
We've had a remarkably stable, if you look, I think Walt brought this up earlier, if you look at you go back 10 years, we really haven't fluctuated. All of a sudden we were in the 12,000 area, and it just kind of hung in there, up and down a little bit, and it didn't go anywhere. And then when the recession you can see the recession in the budget. You can see it actually in the number of children. I don't know what happened there, but it's like, we've just been fairly stable, and all of a sudden to see this bump I'm a little surprised by that, but I probably shouldn't be, but I am surprised, and I'm wondering if there's something underlying all this that we all of a sudden find ourselves within the next 5 years with a significant percentage increase every year.
But Tom, if you look at the reason people move to York County, that reason hasn't changed. The reason is it's a better place to live than any other area around here. Our schools are better, our fire and life safety couldn't be better than it is. and just all around a good place to live. And that's why people pay more money to live in York County than they could buy a house for in Newport News or Hampton.
As Tim said, I think that we perceive the anomaly of the landings at Langley to be over. And we're going to see growth in the next 5-10 years, but it's not going to be the spike, at least as best we can tell. I mean, we may be surprised, but as best as we can do it with the crystal ball that Tim has, we don't think there's going to be another one of those spikes in the foreseeable future.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We don't want to monopolize all your time with this information, because I know Dr. Shander has some things he wants to present, but there's a lot of detail in the memo. Maybe some of the more detailed questions that you might have will be answered if you take a look at the memo. We just had an opportunity to share this with Dr. Shander yesterday, the memo and the details. And so the next step is for our staffs to get together and talk about, okay, what's this mean? We need to learn more about what the instructional capacity is in some of the school buildings, and then work together, our staffs, to try to figure out, okay, what does this mean in terms of timing, in terms of the need for new school facilities and where. And we intend to do that over the next couple weeks so that we can have some information that can be worked into the budgeting process.
Excellent idea.
Tim, I've got one more kind of a comment, but a question. Recently, a decision was made in Washington that results in, or will result in, some 4 million people no longer being concerned about being deported. In other words, people living in the shadows of this country. Right? Now that those 4 million people no longer have to worry about deportation, and we've seen, of course, a lot of Hispanics up in the Upper County and so forth and across this country, but have we taken into consideration in some of these numbers what that, I think I know the answer, but I think it's also something that we probably want to be aware of and try to get our arms around what, if any, impact the folks who have habitually been living away from observation. Now they're out in the open. Those 4 million people, of course, are spread from one end of the country to the other. And have we even considered what we might expect in terms of school-age children now that they can come out of those shadows that they've been living in for years?
No, we haven't looked at that.
Okay, so just a thought that it's there, and at least for the short term, it's going to probably impact at some point. Robert?
I just think it could be really a daunting thought, if you think about it, you know, if the masses really at one time, it's, you know.
Well, they're not all kids. I mean, they're 4 million people, but
Oh, I
many
know,
of them
but
are young.
There's a lot of them,
Yeah.
but good point.
Just one quick point, getting back to Mr. Shepherd's question. Yeah, we're about where we were 10 years ago in total enrollment. It's been up and down, as I said. At Magruder and Yorktown, these two zones, though, there has been a net increase of over 200 students over the past 10 years. So these things tend to, you know, wash out when you look at the whole picture. But these two zones have been more active than the other elementary school zones in terms of growth.
Okay.
Tim, thank you. That was good information for our board to listen to. Dr. Shandor?
Thank you. Mark, I appreciate the information. Tim, thank you. Great job. It's fantastic information for our staff to dive into and digest, and we certainly look forward to collaborating with you as well. Your facts and figures may be off by 3, because in May, my family will be moving here, so I'm not sure where we're going to live yet or if our house is built
I
yet.
told you there's one next door to me.
Yeah, that's right. Good evening, Chairman Wiggins, Vice Chairman Shepard, and Board of Supervisors. Good evening, Chairman Medford, Vice Chairman George, and fellow board members. Tonight, I'd like to share 2 items with you. First, I'm going to ask our CFO, Dennis Jarrett, to provide a brief update related to the current status of the state and federal budgets. I will then share some information on 3 budgetary areas of focus for our school division. So, Mr. Jarrett.
Well, I will certainly be more brief. I can assure you of that, because I don't have a whole lot to say tonight. But Mr. Medford, Mr. Wiggins, members of the 2 boards, I'm glad to be able to present to you some information tonight, although albeit very limited. Dr. Shandor asked me to provide just some, I guess, some preliminary comments regarding what we're looking at with state revenue and federal revenue tonight, and also Virginia retirement system, because, as you know, the Virginia retirement system increases for the school division have been significant over the last 4 years. So I thought I would spend some time just talking to you about those three areas. So let's first talk about state revenue. Well, this is the FY16, next fiscal year, the year we're going to be working on. It's the second year of the biennium for the state. It'll be a short session for the General Assembly. Now, normally, I could probably walk in here and I could say, if I look at the projections that the General Assembly did a year ago, applied those to the formula, and I could give you a good rough idea of where we're going to be. But there's a little quirk going on right now. And that quirk is the state budget is in a deficit mode, if you will. There's a deficit that they're working through. Now, the good news on that deficit is this. There was a deficit component related to the fiscal year 15 budget. Now, the good news for public education is we did not share in any of that reduction in FY15. So our FY15 budget with regards to state revenue is really pretty much intact. In fact, it's looking good because of the enrollment projections that Mr. Cross was talking about a few minutes ago. So for fiscal year 15, everything as far as the state revenue goes looks good. Our budget is intact. As we look forward to 16, that's where it's going to get a little bit more unable to predict at this point, because there is a deficit right now, and that deficit at the state level is between, depending on who you talk to, it's between $270 to $300 million. Now, the governor and various folks in the General Assembly have made it very clear that K-12 education will not be spared in those reductions. And because they're going to have to, it's just too large, they're going to have to go through, look at all state agencies, all folks that are receiving state funds to make up that deficit. So that's why I'm saying that it's real difficult for me tonight to say what we're going to get in state funding. But I will say there are some positive things going on at the state level for us. I'll tell you a couple of those. First one is our composite index. As you know, that composite index is their measure of the local ability to pay. That will not change for us in fiscal year 16. So there is no risk of that going up. Because remember, as the composite index goes up, we get less state revenue. So we're okay in 16 with the composite index. I mentioned the VRS rates. The VRS rates are on a biennium basis for the teacher pool, which is the pool that generates the most cost to the division. So we got another year of the same rates for VRS. That, I can't emphasize the importance of that, because if you go back and you look at our budgets from 2000, I think it's 11 forward, we have incurred over $12 million in cost related to increased rates related to the Virginia retirement system. So that is a huge, I guess you might say, relaxation for us as we look at 16 with regards to cost. There are the other big factor for us as we look at FY16 is the enrollment projection. Mr. Cross was talking about our enrollment projection this year was 12,420. His projection for next year is 12,670. That's an increase of 250 students. Now, we've got to be careful with that, because 250 students requires us to have additional staff too, because those students get dispersed out into the schools and so forth. So there's an expenditure requirement that goes along with that. But the real positive side of that, there is additional state revenue that comes with those additional students as well. So those are three positive things we have going for us at the state level, with the big negative right now being we don't know what the budget reductions are going to mean for us at this point in time. So that's pretty much what we have at this point at the state level. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions on that before I move to the federal level.
Hey, Dennis, I was just curious, the composite index, so that's due to change in 2017 again.
That's correct.
So that could be favorable again. Once again, we were, 4 years ago, we were hit terribly with it. Then we had a little better news this last time. So it could be a more favorable scenario for us, I suppose.
Well, Dr. George, that's a very interesting question, because if what happened to us when the recession took hold, Northern Virginia's composite index started dropping. Well, as theirs drops, ours goes up. They drive the train in this. Northern Virginia drives the train with the composite index. So if by some chance Northern Virginia growth in terms of the factors that go into the composite index exceed our growth, you're exactly right. That could very well happen in 17. I am not going to predict that.
You better not, Dennis.
I will, but I will say that, the tide's got to turn at some point. Now, whether it's going to be in 17 or not, I can't say, but that would be a positive thing if it did happen. On the federal revenue front, I was probably less certain there. For fiscal year 15, you probably are aware, we don't have a federal budget yet. And that's the budget we're working under right now. The federal government's working under a continuing resolution right now. And that continuing resolution expires on December the 11th. Whether or not they're going to go into a further continuing resolution or they'll pass a bill that carries the budget for the full year, no one really can answer that question, at least no one in the outside of Congress and maybe the president at this point in time. But I'm not sure they can either at this stage. I agree with you, Mrs. Wiggins. But in any event, what we're looking at right now for 15 is a budget that has not been approved in fully for the entire year. So I can't really tell you what we're getting this year entirely. So I certainly can't predict 16 because they haven't even started on the fiscal year 16 budget. So all I can say is stay tuned. And as soon as they get the 15 budget worked out, I'm assuming they're going to go to the 16. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. But I do want to leave you with one thing because, our most significant portion of of federal revenue is impact aid. And our impact aid, if you look at our budgets, we pretty much leveled that out for a number of years. That's not going to continue. Sequestration, I know that's a word all of us are familiar with. Well, sequestration was I want to say minimized, but the impact of that was lessened for 14 and 15 because there was agreement done at the federal level that eased the burden of that for fiscal years 14 and 15. Fiscal year 16, unless Congress can come to terms and come up with an agreement that works for everyone, then sequestration will take hold again. We have felt the reduction of sequestration, albeit it's not been that significant for us in the impact aid area, because I'm pleased to say impact aid was one of the areas that really gets bipartisan support. And so because of that, impact aid did not get reduced at the same level as other federal programs did. So I think it's a real positive thing for impact aid. But the truth of the matter is, it did get reduced, which on top of that, what we have is the way the formula works out, the funds are being dispersed differently. So the long short of this is that I probably am going to be foreseeing some reductions in impact aid next year, some minor reductions, and we may have to continue those as we move forward into the further out fiscal years. One thing that the federal government has done in recent years, I give them really a lot of credit for this, they have really tried to catch up on their payments, the prior year payments for the impact aid. You've probably remember me coming in and saying, well, these prior year payments for impact aid are hard to predict, and they're sporadic. They have 5 years to pay those out, and they've really done a great job of trying to get those back on schedule for us. So it's becoming less of an issue projecting those prior year payments, albeit they're still out there. They're just not as much of them as there were before. And so as that starts to level out, we have to start leveling out our revenue projections for that as well.
And it's just for
Yes,
some
sir.
perspective, do you recall what the impact aid was for this past year?
Yeah, we budget $9,450,000 for impact aid. Yeah, that's our annual cost. Now, we also have other federal revenues. We get federal revenue for Title I, which is related to students that are on free and reduced lunch. We also get Title VI-B revenue for students with disabilities. So we get other federal revenue, but the bulk of our money from the feds comes from impact aid, which I will say that I'm very pleased that Bethel Manor Elementary School, or not Bethel, but Bethel Manor Housing has kind of stabilized now. We actually were able to count those students while they were displaced, which is a positive thing, but I feel much better knowing that they're now populating into that school again. So I expect our impact aid application this year to reflect those higher numbers of those students living there, which is another positive thing at the federal level. Any further questions? No? Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Before I get started into my 3 areas of focus as I'm looking for the budget, I want to begin with a thank you to Mr. Carter for taking time in his busy schedule to meet with me. Quite honestly, in September on my first day, Mac, Mr. Carter, and Ms. McGettigan were extremely welcoming to me, and I certainly appreciate that. We had a lot of conversations about building a relationship and working together to improve communication, so I certainly appreciate that. Second, I want to thank the Board of Supervisors You also spent some time with me. I got to meet the two of you on my first day as well, and I got to break bread with Mr. Zaremba, with Ms. Haywood up in Bruton, and I also got to spend time with Mr. Wiggins and Mr. Richak. I knew I was going to do that. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate talking about the topics within schools, but I also, more importantly, appreciate you giving me time when we talk about York County and York County as a whole. So that's extremely important. I've listened to your feedback, and tonight I'm going to share 3 budgetary areas of focus with you. But before I get started, for me, like any educator or superintendent, you have to highlight student success. So before I get started with the 3 areas of focus, I want to start off by sharing a few statistics. YCSD is one of only 22 school divisions across the state out of 132 wherein every school in the division is fully accredited, and I think we should be incredibly proud of that.
Absolutely.
So over this past year, we've had significant gains made in mathematics performance this past year at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Increases from the previous year range from 5 percentage points to 37 percentage points, with most gains in the double digits. Again, that's extreme. We should be extremely proud of that. The on-time graduation rate for the YCSD class of 2014 was 94.5%, which is outstanding. This exceeds the state average by almost 5 percentage points, beating out all but one other school division in our region. Additionally, the percentage of students in the YCSD class of 2014 earning an advanced studies or international baccalaureate diploma was 65%, outdistancing the state average of 50.6% by over 14 percentage points. So again, we should be extremely proud of those results. And finally, YCSD students continue to exceed the state and national averages on the College Board SAT. So again, these are fantastic results, and I think something that we have to take the time to celebrate. But we all know these results are not only a result of the hard work of our students, they're results of our dedicated teachers and support staff, and they've all played a major role. I'm a firm believer that there are 2 kinds of employees that make up a school division. There's teachers, and there's everyone else that supports teachers. And in YCSD, we have 890 teachers, and we have 850 people, staff members, who support these teachers. My goal as superintendent is to continually attract, recruit, and most importantly, retain high-quality staff members to improve outcomes for our students. So my first area of focus is staff compensation. I just want to share a few pieces of information, and I know everyone around this table knows these statistics, and this is my 20th day on the job, so I haven't memorized them yet. As you know, prior to FY15, there was no step increase provided for staff for 5 fiscal years, FY10 through FY14. No raises were provided, excluding VRS adjustments, and no position reviews were conducted for 4 fiscal years, FY10 through 13. In FY14, a 2% adjustment to the pay scales for full-time staff was provided. In FY15, a step increase was provided to all eligible staff as well as a scale adjustment. Additionally, teachers were shifted to a new pay plan. The total average increase in FY15 was 3%. Our biggest concern relates to compression on all of our pay scales. For example, since no steps were provided for the last 5 fiscal years, a teacher with 6 years of experience is on the same step as a teacher with 1 year of experience. The next area of focus relates to transportation. Transporting our students to and from school is a major priority. We transport students to numerous field trips, athletic events, band competitions, choral concerts, etc. Due to state reductions, we have had to cut a significant portion of our bus replacement funds since 2010. We are behind in our replacement schedule, which has certainly impacted the budgetary needs for parts and maintenance on an aging fleet. Out of 160 buses, we have 23 which have exceeded our typical replacement schedule, which is typically 14 years and or 200,000 miles. Therefore, based on this information, my second area of focus will be transportation. Finally, the third area of focus will be technology. We all understand the importance and need for technology. This request will not be to purchase new items, new shiny items, so to speak. It will be simply to maintain and replace big-ticket items such as servers, storage networks, and net scalers. All of these items were purchased in 2009 and should be replaced every 5 years. This means all this equipment should be replaced in 2014. We need to make sure our school division is technologically equipped to manage and maintain all academic and business functions. These three areas of focus are data-driven and will meet the needs of the school division. It's too early in the process to provide exact figures and costs, et cetera, as Mr. Jarrett shared earlier. Again, I want to thank you, Mr. Medford and Dr. George, as well as Mr. Wiggins and Mr. Shepard and Mr. Carter, for agreeing to meet monthly. I think that will provide a great opportunity for us to share information and to collaborate as we continue to move through the budget process. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to talk through these areas of focus, and I look forward to working with Mr. Carter as we work through this process. Thank you. I'll entertain any questions, or I'll ask Carl James to help me answer some of the questions as
Well,
well.
just a comment. I realize that, you're saying that, of course, you're giving us the statistics for all of the graduates and the people that are attending our schools. But another thing, and of course, we also realize that it takes the will of the parents to
Absolutely.
if sometimes you have to take your, well, I won't say belt off, that's used to happen to me,
It
but.
happened to me too, sir.
But the people, when parents really care about their children's education, when you have those kind of parents, they look for schools that their children can learn a lot in. And so they look for a location. Well, when they find that location, like York County, and most of the people that from the military that are shipped in here, the first thing they want to know is how are the schools there? What's the best schools around? Where should we live? And of course, it turns out to be York County because of the statistics you just mentioned. And so when you have the parents that really care about their children, and they make them do their homework, they know where they are at 11 o'clock at night, and those are the citizens that we have living in York County. So success breeds success. And when we have good schools like you guys give us, certainly we're going to get the people that live here,
Sure.
that have the money to buy the houses that cost more for the same house that they would in these other areas. So it's along with the schools, we've got to give credit to the families as well that
Absolutely.
live here.
Well, if I could add one thing, during my entry, as I'm entering into the district and as I'm meeting numerous staff at all the schools and within the school board office, the one thing that I'm extremely impressed with is how many of our staff members grew up here, went to school here, went away to college, and came back here to
Yeah.
contribute to the workforce and work in the school system. So again, that's something to be incredibly proud of.
I will just say, just to piggyback on your point, the elementary schools, my kids went to Mount Vernon. The elementary schools, the parent engagement is unbelievable. They are in there every day reading to these kids. There's almost a sign-up list for coming in and wanting to read to the kids
Right.
and participate in the classes. I honestly don't think you have that elsewhere.
You don't.
I know not to this level anyway, and that
You don't.
speaks to your point. I mean, the parents are engaged, and we're just so fortunate to have that here.
They volunteer thousands and thousands of
Oh, my
hours.
goodness, yeah.
Tens of
Yeah.
thousands, I think
Right.
it actually amounts to.
And for that, I'm gonna put a plug in. See, Mr. Cross, we're gonna see where the Marquise goes, and when I say that, that's an exit off of 64. Easy exit on and off. Folks can work in Richmond, farther west, and live in York County. Slip in and out. So I just see that area growing.
We haven't even gotten to school yet. and
I
you're
know,
already-
but I see the area growing because of the great school, because of the county.
Absolutely.
I just see that area. But anyway, we got a long ways to go.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kind of go back to your 3 points. You talked about compensation, transportation, and technology, okay? We're in the process of kind of building up to understand what we have. We don't even know what the county revenues are yet. We haven't gotten anything. We haven't even, staff, as far as I know, or the board of supervisors, as far as I know, have not really given the guidance at all to Mark Carter. But one of the elephants in the room that we're going to need to deal with is a new school. I mean, based on everything I'm seeing coming out of here, there's going to be a requirement for a new school. So looking at the A&E piece of it's about anywhere from 2.3 to 2.6 million, and then another 23 million to follow that. Okay, and kind of going back down to down in this lower part of the county, we still have whatever's going to be the classroom development, because I think we just approved $10 million in bonds a couple months ago for development of new for things you guys need to do into the schools. So are we looking at a new school for next year? You guys going to come in and request a new school?
Well, I know that that our CIP has been finalized for the most part. That includes getting an elementary school on the CIP. Now, moving it around based on growth and projected growth, and figuring out when the A&E should be done, and figuring out when a school would be needed as far as when the growth starts to begin happening. Maybe more of these developments go to active mode. But we know that if it's not on the CIP, then it's another year trying to get it on the CIP, and it just keeps delaying something. We move projects around all the time because something that's going to last a little bit longer, we can wait an extra couple of years, or county staff says our maybe debt service needs to be a little bit less this year than the following year, and they make adjustments all the time, and that's staff working with staff. So, but I like the idea behind the two staffs getting together, having those serious discussions that you're bringing a question up about, and then bring back to us what the real picture looks like. I don't want to get caught, as a school board member, I don't want to get caught in a situation in the Yorktown zone or at the Magruder that we built out 3 times or 2 times on these schools already, and the plat, the land is very scarce at this point, and having to roll in learning cottages, I call them, the trailers, at the last minute, because all of a sudden we get slammed, and then we're looking at 3 years before we could open a door to a school, and we're having to add more mobile units. I don't want to get caught in that situation. We know we might end up having to use some temporary classroom spaces to get us through getting this new school built. We saw projections really started to come in, our numbers started to increase a lot. But I just don't want to get caught getting blindsided, I guess, with the staffs working together on a regular basis to keep us updated. Then I think that'll be very helpful.
Well, there's a lot of lead time, though. I mean, you know this. We all know there's lead time of building the schools. I mean, the A&E piece will be at least a year.
That's a year.
And then you got another year or maybe a year and a half for the school itself. So, getting ahead of the curve. I mean, I was looking at the numbers, and I projected based on just number of classrooms, it's like 13 additional classrooms, if I think I've got that number, just based on 25 students. So, unless you've got the capacity, I mean, I'm seeing a new school somewhere in the future here, and it probably up in that area where in the elementary zone, because you've got, we've already got deals going where the property is going to be, proffered. I think Marquis got some land. There's some land up at York Middle School. We even have a space down there in Sheila's district if we need to do a school down there in Kiln Creek.
I don't think we need it.
So but I mean, we've got
We have
the place in there, and the school board's carried on your books capital improvement for about the last 7 years. You've carried a school. I mean, you've identified a school requirement there, and the board of supervisors in our budget have not been able to do that because of the uncertainty of, because you look at 10 years and the numbers didn't move. So, where do we insert it? And we have to maintain a conservative, we have to show a realistic line of where that money's going to come from.
And I know we've been very fortunate to be able to have your support in the small projects we've been able to do to remove those outdoor, learning cottage classrooms.
Learning cottages, that's a good way to put it.
And the trailers,
Well,
because we can remove, because as we remove those, we remove an element of a safety issue, no plumbing, so they have to come indoors to use the restroom, back out, weather, coming in for, so we've been able to remove most of that through your support and adding the additions to our buildings. But we know that what happens if these numbers start coming true, and even more so, and then you're right, we haven't started A&E because it's not on the CIP, so it's another year delayed, so we could literally be 4 years. before we could open
Mark,
the door.
that's why I think what you said before about the staffs working together at that level, because we're not experts. You all
Right.
are much more attuned to it than we are. We take your advice and we move forward with it as long as you can detail it for us. And I think with the two staffs working together, we're going to see a huge improvement on our ability to accept what you're giving us because you've worked hard on it.
Well, one of the things,
That's
that,
very,
and the
very good.
reason I asked the question is because if you look at their capital improvement plan, okay, it comes due, the A&E is for next year, okay? I mean, you got your capital improvement plan, and that kind of gives us a sense of where you're going. And then, you know, we know we're generally, we have a sense of what we're going to do in terms of what we can afford and what we're going to pay out. We're not going to have students, you know, not getting a good education because that's a priority for the board, but we're going to continue to do that. So I raise that issue because if it does come up, it's something that we need to be ready to, you know, step up and do whatever we've got to do. Now, along those lines, you know, there was a whole list of things, and I was kind of surprised going back to your list that was not discussed was this issue, and I'll go back to Robbie. Remember the books? So we always talked about the books, right?
Yeah.
$300,000 a year in books. Well, we need to be able to. That's got to be in the discussion with the staff. It's not really books. I discovered it's not books. It's educational material. Okay, and so make sure we get that wording correct. All right. But these are kind of things that you know that I hope we're going to digest with the staff and understand that, you know, there's so much money and what are the priorities, what do you guys really want to get done. If we come to a school, we come to buying a school, and we're not going to just shell out $23 million. It's going to be through bonding, you know, of some type, because it's financial. That's how you do that. So we just, you know, planning for it and see how it's going to work out. Please digest this in the staff work.
You say it's you said the CIP is just what it is. It's a plan. And so when they delve into it, we'll have more facts and figures, and then we can be more realistic in what our expectations need to be in the next few years.
And Tom, you brought up a good point about, you know, the textbooks. Our superintendent's kind of been tasked with, we've had major reductions in many different areas within our budget, just like y'all have had to do. And so he's been kind of tasked with, you know, have we damaged something? We have to now go back. Transportation be an example of one where we've cut too much or we've created a problem. Now we got to come back and correct it somehow. Textbooks will be another example. So I think as we, on his 20th day on the job, but as he continues to work with our staff, we're obviously going to identify more areas where we have to find a long-term solution to fix. And a lot of these, it took 5 or 6 years to cause a problem. It may take us 5 years to fix the problem. But we know that we'll identify some of those as we go through our process and having a new superintendent and such. So
Let me add a word that has not yet been mentioned tonight. You mentioned, Mr. Superintendent, that your top 3 priorities are compensation, transportation, and technology. And as Tom alluded to, you obviously have other things, be they books or what have you, okay? And this Board of Supervisors wants to make sure that we maintain the best place in the Commonwealth of Virginia to live in with respect to our school system especially, but with respect to the other amenities that the community provides its citizens. But, you know, bottom line is, at some point in time, even though the word hasn't been mentioned tonight, we get down to something called taxes, real estate taxes and tax rates and so on. And, you know, this board, the Board of Supervisors in particular, has got to balance not only what we want, but what we expect to have in terms of revenue. And of course, you know, seemingly every year, what we want exceeds what we expect to get in revenue. And so the question always comes up about raising the tax rate, which is the biggest generator of revenue in York County. I know you're new on the job, 20 days with counting today probably, but we have a very bifurcated population profile. For example, in the Upper County, we have a profile of more citizens, tax-paying citizens, that many, many, many of them are retired, fixed incomes and so forth. Down in the lower part of the county, we're fortunate to have a lot of younger families, good jobs, young kids and so on. So we've got this, at some point in time, hopefully working with the school board, along with the members of the school, the Board of Supervisors, and both of you on the end of the table, we're going to recognize that we can only meet so much of what you want as we go through, we start to develop the budget for fiscal year 2016. That's going to be the real crunch. To what extent is this board willing to increase the tax rate? You know, we've always come down arm wrestling at the 11th hour, initially being somewhat warm to a tax rate increase, but when you get right down to the day we've got to vote, there's a lot of cold blood running through our veins with respect to, for a lot of reasons. Sure. And so, one of the things I would implore you to do in the early stages of your tenure is to make sure that Dennis, in particular, as well as the members of the school board, and Mac, and Mr. Carty, he's still on my mind, Mr. Mac Reynolds, make sure that you're fully indoctrinated in terms of that, our budget process and the like. And we've got a bunch of ladies down in the county's finance offices that do an incredible job with respect to use Robbie's term. Did you say cook the books, or just said the books?
I didn't say that.
Just so, but that's, it's a very complicated equation.
Guess
It's
what you
more
wanna
than
say is
just
don't
saying,
cook the books.
my priorities are transportation, technology, and compensation, and the like.
We will bring you a budget of need, like we always have done, but we look forward to working together. That's why, this early work session like this has been very helpful, because I've heard Tim, you did an awesome job in your presentation. Good gracious detail that I'm gonna go back and digest, but it gives me a really good insight of what's going on outside our schools in the county and our community. So a lot of potential possibilities there.
Mr. Zaremba, I would say, though, after tonight's presentation, I think the northern part of the county is going to change its face with new families coming in.
I think so, too.
Yeah, and of course, the Board of Supervisors ultimately takes the blame for that, because we approve those housing projects.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody on the school board have any further questions of Mr. Carter or Dr. Shandor?
I just want to make one comment, I just wanted to publicly say to y'all, I'm sorry for the loss of Mac. And I know the relationships and the bonds that you've created all these years, and I can only imagine the loss. And there's no way
It was
really
tremendous.
for us to express that to you other than just to tell you that. So,
Appreciate that. But I've got one suggestion, if I may, that I'd like to request of the school board. I'd like you to talk to the PTA members and the teachers, because it doesn't do any good when we walk in this front door to see little children out there with signs that say, "Do not fire my teacher." Because we don't have anything to do with firing teachers. We do the best we can do with getting money together, and we don't fire teachers. And then we get inside and we walk around the teachers. And
There's some teachers out there.
the teachers are grading papers, and some of them are laying down grading them. We know that they don't have to do that. They don't have to lay down on the floor. We know that they grade papers at night. And so we already know that. And it doesn't do any good for them to do that. So if you would just tell them that it really doesn't do any good, we're going to do the very best we can do. Would you do that for me?
Sure. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Y'all have any further questions of us?
I appreciate the chance to talk.
This has been great.
Well, we look forward to our board chair, vice chair, and county
We
administrator.
need to get out to the middle school, though. We gotta do a middle school.
We do. We did get to take you to the, I took him to the book closet that Mount
First
Vernon
thing I
scared him
went
to
to.
death.
For other,
Condition of those
for other
books.
board of supervisor members or their staffs, if at any time you want to walk through Yorktown or Magruder and take a look at some of our buildings that are really at capacity, please just make a phone call to Vic. Dr. Shandor will be more than happy, and one of us or anybody will meet you at the building and walk through with you. You've taken many opportunities to walk through some of our schools, so thank you for bringing that up. But with that said, Mr. Carter, thank you very much. I look forward to both of y'all working together. And I'm going to go ahead and adjourn our portion of the school board
And-
joint meeting.
We're gonna take a 5 or 10 minute recess here.
Oh, we have a.
And then we're coming back to finish our meeting.
Okay.
See you.
I'll meet you to the northern part of the county.